We had been on vacation in Oregon for a few days, taking advantage of the rare sunshine on a secluded beach. The kids were in heaven, spending hours playing in the surf, collecting seashells, and building sandcastles that the waves inevitably washed away. It felt like the perfect escape from our busy lives, a chance to slow down and enjoy time as a family. As the day wound down, the sky began to turn a soft orange, and a thick fog started to creep in from the ocean, swallowing up the shoreline. Mark, my husband, suggested we take one last walk along the beach before heading back to our rental. I loved the idea of a peaceful evening stroll, so we all set off together, the kids running ahead as they always did, their laughter echoing through the mist. The fog grew thicker as we walked, and the air turned chilly, but it didn't bother me. In fact, it added a kind of mystical beauty to the scene, making everything feel serene and a little otherworldly. The kids were just silhouettes in the fog, their figures occasionally disappearing and then reappearing like phantoms. I remember feeling so content in that moment, thinking how perfect everything was. But then, as if some invisible switch had been flipped, everything changed. The kids suddenly stopped, all three of them, frozen in place and staring down at something in the sand. I called out to them, but they didn't answer or even turn their heads. The silence that hung in the air was unsettling, and I felt a tight knot form in my stomach as I hurried over to see what had caught their attention. When I reached them, I followed their gaze down to the sand and felt the blood drain from my face. There, partially buried in the sand, was what looked like a human hand. The skin was a sickly grayish color, bloated and mottled from what I could only assume was time spent in the water. The fingers were curled slightly, as if frozen mid-grasp, and the nails were long, jagged, and blackened. It looked grotesquely real, far too real to be a joke or a prop. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. But then the protective instinct kicked in. I snapped out of my daze and quickly pulled the kids away, trying to shield their eyes from the grisly sight. "Mark!" I shouted, my voice trembling. He had been walking a few paces behind us, lost in his own thoughts. He rushed over at the sound of my voice, his expression shifting from confusion to horror when he saw what I was pointing at. His eyes met mine, and I saw the same fear and disbelief mirrored in them. "Take the kids back to the car," he said, his voice tight and urgent. I nodded, not wanting to argue. Mark pulled out his phone and dialed 911 as I led the kids back up the beach, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep a firm grip on their little hands, but I knew I had to keep it together for their sake. We reached the parking lot and waited by the car, my mind racing. I kept glancing back at the fog-covered beach, half expecting to see something, or someone, emerge from the mist. It felt like we had crossed some invisible line between our safe, ordinary lives and something far darker, something we were never supposed to find. The police arrived surprisingly quickly, and we watched as they made their way down to the shoreline. They cordoned off the area, and soon after, a forensic team arrived. I could see the faint shapes of the officers and forensic team through the fog, working methodically in the spot where we had found the hand. I held the kids close, trying to keep their attention on anything but what was happening just a short distance away. After what felt like hours, one of the officers approached us. His face was serious, and his voice was calm but grave as he spoke. "We've uncovered a body," he said, choosing his words carefully. "It appears to be a woman, and she's been buried in the sand for some time." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all too real. The officer didn't offer many more details, likely to protect the kids, but the fact that a body had been buried on a beach where we'd been vacationing made me feel sick. Mark and I exchanged a glance, and without a word, we both knew what needed to be done. That night, we barely slept. I lay awake, my mind racing, replaying the events of the day over and over. The image of that hand in the sand haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I kept thinking about the woman, about who she was, and what might have led to her being buried there, hidden beneath the sand where our children had been playing just hours before. As soon as the sun came up, we packed our bags and booked the next flight home. There was no way we could stay in Oregon another night, not after what we'd seen. The kids were quiet, subdued, sensing the gravity of the situation even if they didn't fully understand it. I tried to stay calm for their sake, but inside, I was rattled to my core. The flight home was a blur, and when we finally arrived, it felt like we were escaping from a nightmare. We tried to settle back into our normal routine, but the experience lingered in my mind, a dark shadow that wouldn't go away. I found myself checking the news obsessively for updates, hoping to learn more about the woman they'd found, but nothing ever came out. It was as if the beach and its dark secret had swallowed her whole, leaving only the unsettling memory with us. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling of dread that washed over me that day. I try to rationalize it, tell myself that we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that it was all just a horrible coincidence. But deep down, I know that something changed in me that day. We had stumbled upon something we were never meant to find, and it was a reminder that sometimes, the world can be a lot darker and more frightening than we want to believe. "10 years have passed, and I can still feel the cold sand under my feet, the salt in the air, and the creeping dread that snaked its way into our hearts that night. It was supposed to be a simple gathering, a group of high school friends looking to squeeze one last bit of fun out of summer before it faded into memory. But what happened by the water that night has stuck with me, haunting my dreams, whispering in the dark corners of my mind. It was late August, the last Saturday before school started. The night was cooler than usual, with a breeze that hinted at the approaching fall. We gathered at Crescent Beach, our favorite spot, far from the tourists and prying eyes of adults. There were 8 of us, me, Jake, Chris, Emily, Sarah, Nicole, Tyler, and Lucas. We'd been inseparable for most of high school, but this night felt different. There was an edge in the air, a feeling that none of us could quite shake. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, we built a bonfire. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows that stretched toward the water. We passed around drinks, laughed at stupid jokes, and tried to ignore the nagging unease that hung over us like a dark cloud. Jake was the first to suggest we go for a swim. He always was the brave one, the one who pushed us to do things we'd never think to do on our own. The water was dark, almost black in the fading light, but it called to us. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the desire to cling to the last remnants of summer, but one by one, we all agreed. Stripping down to our swimsuits, we ran toward the ocean, our feet splashing in the cold water. The shock of it was enough to wake us up, the initial unease forgotten as we shouted and splashed each other. I remember glancing back at the shore, the bonfire a distant glow, and thinking how small and safe it looked from out here. That's when Emily screamed. It wasn't a playful scream or a shout of surprise. It was raw, primal, the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. We all froze, the laughter dying in our throats as we turned to look at her. She was standing about 10 feet away, staring out into the water, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "What's wrong?" Jake shouted, already swimming toward her. Emily didn't answer. She just kept staring out at the sea, her body trembling. I followed Jake, the cold water now feeling like icy fingers clawing at my skin. As I got closer, I saw what she was looking at. At first, it was just a shadow beneath the surface, something dark and indistinct moving in the water. But then it started to rise. The head broke the surface first, slick with seaweed and something else, something that looked like skin but was too pale, too decayed. Hollow eyes stared at us, empty sockets that seemed to see straight through us. And then, it smiled. Or at least, it tried to. The mouth stretched unnaturally wide, the skin splitting and tearing at the corners. I heard Jake shout something, but the words didn't register. All I could do was stare as more of it emerged from the water. It was humanoid, but wrong in every way. Its limbs were too long, the joints twisted at odd angles. The skin, where it wasn't covered in seaweed or barnacles, was gray and bloated, like it had been underwater for far too long. And the smell, it was a stench that filled the air, a mix of salt, rot, and something else I couldn't identify. "Get out of the water!" Chris yelled, snapping me back to reality. We turned and swam as fast as we could, the creature, or whatever it was, following close behind. I could hear it splashing through the water, its movements erratic and jerky. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, the shore seeming impossibly far away. We stumbled out of the water, collapsing onto the sand. I looked back, expecting to see it coming after us, but it had stopped at the edge of the water, its hollow eyes still locked on us. It didn't move, just stood there in the shallow water, that unnatural smile still plastered on its face. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. We just stared at the thing, too terrified to look away, too scared to move. Then, as if it had lost interest, it slowly sank back into the water, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple. We didn't stay much longer after that. We quickly dressed, packed up what we could, and left the bonfire to burn out on its own. No one said a word as we piled into the cars, the silence thick and suffocating. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those hollow eyes, that terrible smile. The next morning, I thought maybe it had been a shared hallucination, something brought on by too much alcohol and the power of suggestion. But when I met up with the others, I knew they'd seen it too. We didn't talk about it much, just exchanged uneasy glances and tried to pretend everything was normal. After that night, things were never the same between us. We drifted apart during senior year, the bond we'd shared eroded by the memory of what we'd seen. We all went our separate ways after graduation, off to college or work, trying to forget that night on the beach. But forgetting isn't easy. Even now, 10 years later, I still remember it like it was yesterday. I don't go to the beach anymore, haven't since that night. The sound of waves, the smell of salt in the air, it all brings it back. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder what it was we saw out there. I wonder if it's still out there, waiting, lurking beneath the surface, its hollow eyes searching for the next group of kids who wander too far into the water. It was the perfect summer evening. The kind that fills the air with warmth, laughter, and a sense of endless possibilities. The waves kissed the shore as the golden sun dipped low on the horizon. Everything was picture perfect, the kind of scene you'd see in a romantic movie. And I was nervous. Not the bad kind of nervous, but the excited kind. You see, I was about to meet Trevor, the guy I'd been chatting with online for the last 3 months. We had hit it off instantly, spending countless hours talking, laughing, and even video calling each other. He was charming, funny, and everything seemed to click. But nothing prepares you for meeting someone in real life. The way they walk, talk, smell, those details that just don't come through a screen. Still, I was excited. I mean, what could go wrong with a first date at the beach? I arrived a bit early, which was a habit of mine. Trevor had told me he'd bring the snacks and drinks, so I found a spot near the water and set up my towel. The beach wasn't too crowded, most of the families had already packed up and left. Just a few couples and some seagulls remained. It felt like we had the entire stretch of sand to ourselves. Romantic, right? Trevor arrived about 10 minutes later, carrying a cooler and a beach umbrella. He was taller than I expected, and his face had that kind of rugged handsomeness that's hard to find. He smiled, and I felt some of my nerves ease away. We exchanged a hug, and it felt warm, genuine. He set up the umbrella, and we settled under it, both of us awkwardly trying to find a comfortable position to start the conversation. For the first half hour, everything was great. We chatted about our favorite books, our guilty pleasures in TV shows, and our mutual love for dogs. Trevor had a deep, infectious laugh that made me feel like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. We sipped our drinks, which he had poured from the cooler, and munched on some chips. Everything was going fine, better than fine. It was nice. Then things got weird. We were talking about movies, and I mentioned how much I loved horror films. Suddenly, Trevor's whole demeanor shifted. He leaned in close, too close, his eyes widening as he started to tell me about his own fascination with the macabre. At first, it was kind of interesting. I mean, who doesn't love a good ghost story? But then he began describing in detail the kinds of horror that fascinated him: true crime, serial killers, the psychology of torture. He didn't just gloss over these topics, he delved into them with disturbing enthusiasm, talking about famous murder cases as if they were just another episode of a TV show. "You ever hear about the Zodiac Killer?" he asked, a grin spreading across his face. "Imagine being so smart that you could just disappear. Never caught, never even identified." I forced a laugh, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Yeah, pretty creepy stuff. So, seen any good comedies lately?" But he wasn't listening. His eyes had this strange, almost manic glint. "I've always wondered what it would be like," he said, almost whispering now, "to be that elusive. To be able to control life and death. You ever think about that?" The air around us felt suddenly colder, like the sun had taken all its warmth with it as it dipped below the horizon. I laughed again, this time more nervously. No, not really my thing." But he just kept going, talking about how the mind of a killer works, how they plan, how they think, how they feel, or rather, how they don't feel. He seemed almost proud. My heart started racing. This wasn't just a casual interest, this was something else. Something darker. I decided it was time to leave. "Hey, it's getting pretty late, and I have an early morning tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice light, casual. "Maybe we should call it a night." Trevor's eyes darkened, the playful smile from earlier completely gone. "Leaving so soon? But we're just getting to the good part." I stood up, trying to keep my composure. "Yeah, I really should get going. But this was fun. We should do it again sometime." I wasn't planning on ever seeing him again, but the words just spilled out, automatic. He stood up too, blocking my path. "You know, it's funny," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You spend months talking to someone, getting to know them, and then you meet them in person, and they turn out to be completely different. It's disappointing." My stomach dropped. I tried to sidestep him, but he moved with me, still blocking my way. "Look, Trevor, I had a great time, but I really need to go." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I was about to make a run for it when, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the darkness in his eyes vanished. He stepped back, a wide grin splitting his face. "I'm just messing with you." "Geez, you should have seen your face." Classic. I forced a laugh, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, you really got me there." But as I quickly gathered my things and started walking towards the parking lot, I could feel his eyes on me, following me. I resisted the urge to run, forcing myself to walk at a normal pace, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of knowing how badly he had freaked me out. Once I reached my car, I threw my things into the passenger seat and locked the doors the second I was inside. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and as I finally started the engine, I glanced back at the beach. Trevor was standing where I had left him, watching me, still grinning. I drove away as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I finally felt like I could breathe again. I deleted his number that night and blocked him on all social media. I never heard from him again, but for weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It's been 2.5 years now, and I've moved on. I don't think about that night much anymore, and I've even started dating again. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night or hear footsteps behind me in a quiet place, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, somewhere. Watching. Because the thing that scares me most isn't what happened that night on the beach. It's the fact that for 3 whole months, I thought I knew Trevor. But the truth is, you never really know someone until you meet them in person. And by then, it might be too late. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your time and engagement mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support keeps this channel going, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.